I am back with the Great Airport Mystery, and we are on Chapter 8, Masked Attacker. There was a moment of thunderstruck silence. Who had stole the Hardys' camera and films, and why? Randy was apologetic, saying he felt responsible for leaving the plane unattended. "I'll pay for the loss," he declared. "We wouldn't consider it," Frank said, shaking his head. "Besides, it's not so much the camera we're worried about. The films." "Right," Joe added quickly. He cast a glance at his brother. "You probably have the same suspicion I do, Frank. The thief might have wanted to prevent us from developing those pictures." "Then why did he take the camera too?" was Randy's next query. "Because he figured there was more exposed film in it," Frank explained. "Good reasoning," Randy agreed. The boys recalled the small crowd that had collected on the ramp when their plane taxied in. Jerry Madden had been among them. Perhaps, Frank thought, he might know some of the other onlookers. The young detectives returned to the stand-wide hangar to question Jerry. "I recognized only two faces in the crowd," said Jerry, after the boys told him about the theft. "Mike Zim, the mechanic, and Aaron Lieber, a co-pilot mechanic who seems to be a special pal of Lance Peterson's." "Zim again?" Frank's eyes narrowed. "Odd the way he keeps popping up in our case." "Sure is," said Joe. "I'll bet that Snoopy mechanic is somehow mixed up in the platinum business. But why would he want our films?" The Hardys finally decided to trail Zim and Lieber when the two men quit work for the day. Frank asked Jerry for a description of Lieber, then requested the pilot to check the men's lockers for the stolen camera. "They keep 'em locked," Jerry said. "Everyone around here does, but the doors have slats a little wider than usual. Maybe I can peer in through the openings." "I'll try after Zim and Lieber leave." The Hardys hurried from the hangar. Frank hid behind some engine crates a short distance away. Joe, at his brother's direction, went to the airport terminal building to telephone Chet Morton and another friend, Biff Hooper. Their pals might come in handy if the Hardys ran into trouble while tailing Zim and Lieber. It was not long before Joe returned. "We're in luck," he said. "Chet can use his father's produce truck, which will be a good cover-up. He's starting for the airport immediately and will pick up Biff on the way. I told Chet to wait for us near our car in the visitors' parking lot." Nearly half an hour passed before Zim and a thin, bony-faced man with beady eyes emerged from the stand-wide hangar. "Aaron Lieber," muttered Frank. The young sleuth watched the men carefully. Neither of them carried anything, and the aerial camera was too bulky to be hidden beneath their coats. The pair stopped for a few minutes and talked in low tones, then got into separate cars and drove off. Frank and Joe dashed to the visitor parking lot. There they recognized the Morton's farm truck and ran to it. Behind the wheel was the Hardy stout chum, and seated next to him was tall, lanky Biff Hooper. Biff was an energetic boy who prided himself on his boxing ability. "There's no time to lose," Frank declared. "Joe, you go with Chet in the truck and follow Lieber. I'll take Biff with me in our car and tell Zim." The two vehicles drove off and headed towards the airport exit, through which the two suspects would have had to pass. The boys' timing was perfect. They neared the exit just as the cars driven by Zim and Lieber pulled out onto the main road. After driving a short distance, the two men took different routes. Frank followed Zim, dropping behind as far as possible so as not to be conspicuous. Joe and Chet went in pursuit of Lieber. As Frank and Biff rode along, Frank briefly outlined the situation to his friend, who nodded enthusiastically. "You can count on me if there's any trouble." He set his jaw and skillfully executed several left jabs in the air. "Save your energy," Frank told him with a grin. "You might need it." The young sleuth kept his eyes fixed on the car ahead. As they entered town a short while later, he saw it slow down to a stop. Zim got out and went into a photographic shop. "Freeman's camera house," Frank observed. He wondered if this was just a coincidence, or was Zim planning to have the stolen films developed. "When Zim comes out," he told Biff, "you take the car and follow him. I want to question the shop owner." "But when will we join up?" his friend asked. Frank reached into his pocket and took out an emergency detective kit. From it he extracted a packet containing small pieces of vivid red paper and handed it to Biff. "As you drive," he told him, "drop some of this every few seconds. That will leave a trail and I will follow later." "But what if I run out of paper?" Biff asked. "If you have to follow Zim that far," said Frank, "stay with him and find out where he goes. Then retrace your route. I'll be following the trail on foot as far as it takes me. In the meantime," Frank went on, "I want to call Jerry Madden at the Stanwide hangar and ask him if he's had an opportunity to check the men's locker." Frank got out of the car. He found a public telephone across the street where he was able to call and still keep an eye on the camera shop. Summoned to the phone, Jerry Madden told Frank that he had found no sign of the aerial camera in either of the lockers. Frank requested Jerry to keep his eye open and to call Mr. Hardy should anything turn up. Frank had just completed the call when he saw Zim come out of the shop and get into his car. He drove off, with Biff trailing behind. Frank hurried into the camera shop. A man of medium height with dark hair was jotting notes in his order book. He proved to be the owner, Mr. Freeman. The young detective identified himself and asked if Mr. Zim, who had just been there, had left film to be developed. Mr. Freeman said the man had left 4 rolls to be developed, but had given him the name R.C. Williams. Frank realized that it was possible the films really did belong to a man named Williams, and that Zim was merely having them developed for him. There would be no way of knowing until the pictures were developed. "Mr. Freeman," said Frank, "we Hardys are suspicious these films are stolen from us." The proprietor was eager to help the boys find out. He promised that when the negatives and prints were returned from the laboratory, he would notify Frank immediately. "Thanks a lot," Frank said, then left the shop. Daylight was beginning to fade, prompting him to hurry in search of the trail he had instructed Biff to mark. Almost immediately he stopped at the first red paper, then another piece, and another. Frank estimated that he walked nearly a mile when the trail led him onto a quiet residential street. He quickened his pace as darkness increased and a breeze sprang up, threatening to erase the paper trail. Dead ahead, he was suddenly elated to see his car parked on the street. As Frank neared it, he could see Biff at the wheel. "How did things work out?" Frank asked in a low voice as he eased into the seat beside his pal. "Luckily your suspect reached his destination before I ran out of paper," Biff said. He pointed to a house a short distance away and told Frank that Zim was inside. "He lives there," said Biff. "I got out and walked past the house. His nameplate is posted on the lawn." Frank said that he wanted to watch the house a while. "Biff, How about your driving to the nearest store and picking up some sandwiches, milk, and some ice cream for us? We're going to be here a long time." Biff went off and Frank stationed himself behind a tree. Daylight was now completely gone. The area was quiet, and light radiation fog was beginning to drift from the trees and shrubbery. Frank folded his arms against the chill that was developing in the air. He hoped that Biff would not be too long getting back. Suddenly the stillness was disturbed by the sound of someone whistling. It seemed to be coming from the far side of Zim's house. Frank recognized the tune, "High Journey." An eerie feeling gripped him. He was hearing the ghost of Clint Hill. The young detective bent low, crossed the street, and carefully edged towards the house. The sound, he was now certain, was coming from the far side of the dwelling. Frank slowly crept to the rear and listened. The whistle was louder now. He braced himself and then broke into a fast sprint. As Frank rounded the corner of the house, he suddenly collided with a tall man. The force of the contact threw both of them to the ground. Dazed for a second, Frank took a deep breath, then scrambled to his feet. The stranger also got up. He was wearing a mask. The man turned to run, but Frank was too fast for him. He managed to catch him by the collar. As the two tumbled and rolled across the ground, the stranger swung his fist. Frank received a hard body blow that badly stunned him. The stranger leapt to his feet and ran. Frank made an effort to pursue him, but was too late. With consternation, he watched the masked figure vanish into the darkness. And that's the end of chapter 8. And I'll see you tomorrow for chapter 9.